Before we launch our boats, we want to make sure that we have a systematic routine that we follow for pre-operational boat checks. So the primary thing is, whether you're using an inflatable, a john, rigid, whatever type of craft you're using, make sure your drain plugs are in before you put them in the water. Also ensure that your sponsons are full, that everything's pressurized to the operational capacity of the boat to make sure that it's going to operate optimally on the water. Before we take off, we need to go through that sequence of events to make sure we have all the parts and pieces we need in the boat so that we can effectively operate on water without mishap. We're going to need at least 2 paddles or oars. We want at least 2 throw bags. We want to make sure that we put our fuel can in the boat, that we prime it, that we crack the vent cap, and that we do an operational sequence on our motor. So make sure that things are running. When we make sure that our motor is running properly, one of the easiest things we can check, or one of the most vital things we need to check, is to make sure that it is recirculating water. So check your spit valve on the back of the motor, ensure that the motor is warm, that it's operational, and that you are recirculating water components. If you're using an inflatable, also ensure that you have a portable pump with you, so that if you do start to lose inflation, you have the ability to mitigate that problem while you're out on the water. A first aid kit is another good component to put on the boats. Minimal equipment, we're just looking for basic ABCs. We need to have the ability to put flip lines on our craft and have them pre-rigged into position so that if we do get submerged or if we need to swamp the boats, we have the ability to necessitate that. The last component is your victim packaging considerations. So based on what type of boat you're operating and what your primary sequence is going to be as far as loading a victim into the boat, whether you use backboard lever packaging, whether you use cargo nets or snow fencing, flip lines to do a V application like we've covered in the victim packaging segments, or just simple balance ends. Make sure that you have whatever gear it is that you need to do versatile applications for victim packaging. When we do our operational sequence on our motors, we need to know our motors, whether they're 2 strokes, 4 strokes, whether they have electric trims, whether they're manual trims. We also need to evaluate whether they have shallow drive mechanisms. When we're operating in rivers, especially in shallow conditions, we want to ensure that we have our motors in a shallow drive application. That enables the outboard to come up out of the water if we hit any trees or obstructions under the surface of the water without tearing off the shaft or the lower portion of the motor itself. Make sure that your motors are oiled up and fueled up, and then we start with the fuel application before we do our op check. So on the fuel tank itself, ensure that your fuel lines are engaged appropriately. On the fuel lines themselves, you're gonna have 2 ports that connect into the fuel tank. The rimmed port with the seal is always the port that's gonna connect to the needle segment. The open receiving hole is going to connect to the bullet looking segment with the bevel on it. So we want to take that, line it up with those components, engage them until they lock into place. Once they're locked into place, we want to prime the bulb. Once the bulb is primed, then we can go ahead and vent our cap. If you have a difficult time venting your cap because it's on tight or it's drawn down because of heat and where it's been stored, a really quick and easy application to fix that on the field, out in the field, is to take your water knife, use the openings in the fuel cap to get alongside one of the bevels on the fuel tank, and then go ahead and start cranking on that very gently to open up that vent cap. Once your fuel line is established and you got a good connection on your motor, then you're ready to go and start the motor. Always ensure the motors are in neutral. Make sure that you've got your emergency tether cord locked into your emergency shutoff. When we put our emergency tethers in, ensure that you fully engage it, and then ensure that this mechanism is connected to your person at all times. If you get pitched out of the boat, it's the only component that's going to prevent the motor from continuing to run and taking the boat away from you. Once your tether's in, you're engaged, you have that in the run position, motor in neutral, start your motor up. This motor is equipped with an electric trim. Make sure that your trim pin assignment on the back of the motor, on the back side of the transom, is set appropriately for the pitch of your boat to run optimally. It's also important before you drop the motor in and actually start it up that you've inspected your prop, you're sure that your prop is operational, that you're not missing any blades or don't have any significant dings to the prop. Also ensure that the cotter pin and the keeper washer on the back of the prop hub are in place and properly installed so that you're not going to rotate the prop off of the motor. Once your motor sequence is done, everything's operational, your motor is warm, and you've done all of your pre-boat op check stuff, you've got all your gear, you're ready to roll. When you get ready to load personnel onto your boat, if your boat's not equipped with a load plate, then you need to use the Coast Guard reference calculation about properly loading your boat. When we get on the boat, we're going to talk about how we load boats when we're moving in water, and if you've overloaded the boat with passengers or personnel, it's very easy to rotationally capsize the boat or prevent it from planing out and operating properly on the water. So if you don't have a load plate that tells you exactly how many people you can put in the boat or what the max weight capacity is, the calculation is length of boat times width of boat divided by 15. We have a caveat to that. That's a U.S. Coast Guard application, and it's designed around a coefficient of 150 pound passenger. That's why they use that coefficient of 15 to derive maximum number of people in the boat. But the average firefighter is closer to 200 pounds. So utilizing a coefficient of 20, dividing that length times width by 20, gives you a more accurate reference point for how many people you want to put in the boat. All right, when we get ready to deploy away from the bank, we typically want to use paddling operations unless we're in a deep well or a boat launch. So ensure that your motor stays in neutral. You may have to trim your motor up out of the water. Use your primary rescuer that's in the boat with you to go ahead and push the boat offshore, get through your rocky crag so that you're in the deep running water and you're capable of operating your motor without tearing up your prop. On motors, it's important to note that most motors are set up for left-hand operations. When I say set up, it just implies that the natural throttle up application on those drives is designed to be just like a motorcycle or things that we grew up with as kids for more throttle or less throttle. If you go with those left-hand operations on those type of motors, then you're going to have a natural twisting application and a natural response from the motor. If you go to a right-hand operation on left-handed motors that are set up for left-hands, then it's going to be the opposite. So when you want to go faster, you're going to actually rotate your wrist forward as opposed to that natural back position. There are also different applications on your rudder controls as opposed to whether or not these actually manipulate your forward, your reverse, and your neutral. There's two-handed operations and there's single-hand operations. So typically speaking, as a general rule of thumb, if your outboards are 30 horse or less, you're going to have a single control component up here. That's going to enable you to throttle up as well as transition from forward to neutral to reverse. As soon as you get above 30 horse, you're typically going to start seeing two different operational components. You're going to have a throttle mechanism, then you're going to have a forward and neutral and reverse component back here or on the outboard itself. So it's important that you know your motor and that you position your body far up enough on the boat so that you can fully rotate the rudder and control the motor, as well as effectively operate your forward, your neutral, and your reverse.